My first question is, why is effective political and civilian control of the military essential in democracy?
Well, obviously, democracy is about the will of the people, and the military is not elected by the people. So to ensure that the military maintains an agenda which is consistent with the will of the people, it's important to have political controls and to have the involvement of civilians in the process. And there have been certain countries where those controls were inadequate, and so then the military, got a lot of control over its own agenda and developed its own agenda, which did not reflect the will of the people. And I think that creates problems in a democracy that need to be avoided.
What does it mean institutionally and in substance?
What it means is basically creating governmental structures that will ensure democratic control of the military. So, for example, in the case of the United States, the President of the United States is voted in by the people democratically. But he is also the commander-in-chief of the military. He makes all of the decisions about the ultimate goals of the military, its priorities, and its policies. The president represents the executive branch of the U.S. government. Then he appoints the Secretary of Defense, who is a civilian. It's not a military officer. But the military brass report to the Secretary of Defense. Then, of course, there's the budget of the Defense Department, and that is voted by the U.S. Congress. That's another check to make sure that the military remains within the will of the people. And there are civilians who work in the Pentagon. There are political appointees who work there. And then there are also a number of boards and committees within the Department of Defense that include other branches of government, like the Department of State, the Department of Treasury, but also include civilian panels that get themselves involved with policy. So in fact, all of these organizational mechanisms are in place to ensure that the military follows the direction of the political leadership and ultimately of the people.
What was your first experience when you first confronted to this issue? In what capacity and how long, and in what capacities did you deal with it?
Yeah, well, my experience being the U.S. ambassador to Hungary was that the relationship between the U.S. and Hungarians on the military side was one of the strongest and most productive relationships in the whole spectrum of U.S. relationships. And on issues of NATO and the military, there was rarely any difference of opinion between the Hungarian side and the U.S. side. And in fact, the two sides worked side by side to achieve the same goals. And so it was really a team. It built a strong esprit de corps and a strong feeling that, we are allies working side by side to achieve common goals. When Hungary was asked to do something on the military side, when I was ambassador, they always wanted to get to yes. They always wanted to have a check mark next to their name. So if the U.S. was looking for additional resources in Iraq, they wanted to have yes next to their name, which made it very productive for me as an ambassador. An important thing happened when I was an ambassador, and that was at the time the war in Afghanistan was very hot. The Dutch at the time they were in charge of a provincial reconstruction team in Baghlan province, but they wanted to move to a different region of Afghanistan and assume a more heavier combat role, but they needed someone to take over the PRT, the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Baghlan province. And so the Dutch ambassador to Hungary asked me to help work with him to get the Hungarians to take over this mission in Boglan province. This was not a small mission. It was a very big undertaking. It meant they would Hungary would have to send a number of troops to Afghanistan. It was a dangerous posting. It was a hardship zone, and it meant that Hungary had very broad responsibility for this region, for this entire region of Afghanistan. And it meant working with the local people, the local government. It meant working with the US. It meant working within the NATO alliance. It meant Hungary was part of the Northern Command in Afghanistan, so it meant Germany was in charge of the Northern Command. It meant working with the Germans. It also meant identifying projects, economic projects, within this province to try to raise the economic profile of Boglan province. So it was really a complex job, and Hungary took it on with relish, and I visited the PRT in Boglan province, and it was really impressive. It really demonstrated to me the impressive military capabilities of the Hungarians, and they had that working like clockwork there, and they did a fabulous job, and I think it really raised their profile within the NATO alliance. Another thing that I will mention was Kosovo. As you may know, Hungary is in charge of a peacekeeping operation in Kosovo, and a UN peacekeeping operation. I visited their operations in Kosovo with the Hungarian Minister of Defense, Imre Szekeres, and Hungary was doing a great job there because Hungary is viewed from Kosovo as a fair player, as someone who is very interested in seeing the Balkans remain part of the West, and they want stability in the neighborhood. But Hungary is also viewed as the more sophisticated country in the north. And so the Hungarian forces in Kosovo were highly respected for all of the sensitivity and capabilities that they brought to that job. There was also, I will mention the air base in Papa, because Hungary has a beautiful air base in Papa that I believe was built during the Soviet era. But then when Hungary was no longer part of the Warsaw Pact, there was no longer a good use for the Papa air base. Even so, the Hungarian military had maintained the Papa air base in top-notch condition, so it was perfectly maintained. So when an opportunity came up in NATO to add a new program, the C-17 program, heavy airlift program, Hungary saw this as an opportunity to utilize this wonderful air base at Papa. And so there was a competition for it. There were bids, and it was Germany's Ramstein Air Base really wanted the program to be based at Ramstein. Romania really wanted it to be based in Romania, and of course Hungary. And so the competition was very hot and heavy, very intense competition. In the end, much to my delight, Hungary won the competition and has turned that into a real success story. And here again, it has raised Hungary's profile in the NATO alliance and demonstrated how integral a part of the NATO alliance they can be. The final point I want to make about when I was ambassador to Hungary relates to Serbia. And both the U.S. and Hungary would like Serbia. And all, they want stability in the neighborhood. They want the Balkans to be part of the West. And Serbia is key to that. When when Hungary was trying to get into the NATO alliance, they worked with the state of Ohio, the military from the state of Ohio, to help enhance their military capabilities. And there are lots of Serbians and lots of Hungarians who live in Ohio. So there's a lot of the state of Ohio, there's a lot of political will, both towards Hungary and towards Serbia. So when I was ambassador, I thought, well, since we both share this desire to get Serbia looking more towards the West, maybe we should get this Hungary and Ohio to work together to help Serbia increase their military capabilities. And so I met with the head of the military from the state of Ohio. He was very interested. And so that has restarted again. And Hungary is now working very actively with the United States to assist Serbia in raising their military capabilities and doing exercises and et cetera. And I think that's been an important key. And because Serbia, it's been, working with NATO directly has been tough, but at times. But working with Hungary, a regional partner, has made it a lot easier to do that. So those were some of the highlights of things that were happening when I was ambassador.
Okay.
Yeah, which meant it was a very robust relationship.
Could you tell me what exactly was your job in supporting this process?
First of all, in terms of, are you talking about, in terms of Afghanistan, I was working with Minister Imre Szekeres and working with other members of the government to try to encourage them to take on this huge responsibility in Afghanistan. So I was personally working with them and also working with the Dutch ambassador at the same time. As far as Kosovo is concerned, really we were just cheering from the sidelines. I visited Kosovo. I visited the Hungarian troops in Kosovo, and my role was really to be supportive as we possibly could of that endeavor, because it was, there are things that Hungary can do as a member of the NATO alliance and that they can be very effective at, that the U.S. cannot be very effective at. And so the U.S. needs to have partners like Hungary who can do things in places where they will be more effective than the U.S. will be. And Serbia is Papa Air Base was really a matter of, I tried to, I got a meeting with the SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and I tried to make a strong case for Hungary. I also met with the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. He came to Hungary, and I also made a strong pitch to him that on Papa, that Hungary would, this would be an important place to have the C-17 program in Hungary and to really cement Hungary into the NATO alliance and to capitalize on Hungary's capabilities. So that, so it was sort of I was trying to influence the decision, let's put it that way.
Okay. What were the most difficult problems you had to confront and how did you manage them?
I think the most difficult problem was that, of course, the U.S. military and the NATO alliance wanted to see Hungary raise its level of military spending. As you know, all members of the NATO alliance commit to 2% of GDP for military spending, but very few members of the alliance actually, meet that level of spending. So I was trying to get Hungary to increase their military spending. And while I think Minister Szekeres was very effective at managing the budget and trying to find ways to, increase it and take advantage of uncommitted funds during the middle of the year, Hungary was in a different place economically between 2006 and 2009 than it is today. Hungary was in a very weak condition under the Gyurcsány government. The IMF was in and out of Hungary. There were serious problems with debt. And so Hungary really didn't have the capacity to significantly increase its military spending at that time. So that was probably the biggest problem.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question to you. What do you know about the current situation?
Yeah. The current situation, as I understand it from reading the newspaper and just hearing things, is extremely positive. I think it's stronger than ever, and part of that is due to the fact that Prime Minister Orbán is very, very supportive of the relationship. He wants Hungary to be in the NATO alliance, and he wants Hungary to have a strong military. So he has made on the question of, well, first of all, Hungary's economy today is in far greater condition under the leadership of Prime Minister Orbán and Minister Mihai Varga. They are one of the, it's an engine of growth within Europe. And Hungary is growing at a very rapid rate. And as a result, they have resources. So now they can spend money on military. And they have committed to do so. And Prime Minister Orbán has made very public commitments to raise the level of military spending. And Hungary has already increased its spending up to 1.4%, which is, gigantic progress on the way to 2%. So that's a huge difference and a very positive difference. And I think importantly, behind that, it's not just, well, I'm going to spend this money. Behind that is that Prime Minister Orbán really wants to modernize and strengthen Hungary's military. And so he's putting, what's happening is, there have been tremendous changes in military technology in the last 10 years. And so when you have old equipment from, the Soviet era, it's no longer state of the art. And so I think Hungary is making huge investments in bringing up, raising the technological level, the level of sophistication in its military equipment. So, they're buying jets, they're buying helicopters, they're buying modern tanks. So all of this will strengthen their capabilities and strengthen their ability to provide security for the Hungarian people. In addition, my understanding is that they're also increasing the number of active duty military and reservists. So that, that means, I think Prime Minister Orbán is very dedicated to having strong defense in Hungary and a strong military. In some cases, Hungary is making its military purchases from other member countries in the NATO alliance, and that's great. And I think the U.S. is hopeful that some military spending will, involve the United States. Fingers crossed. I mean, it's all about competitive bidding in Hungary, which is good, and that's correct. And so let's see where that goes. That would be a very positive development. I think there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are joint exercises, with Serbia and with the U.S. and Hungary do joint military operations. And of course, recently there was a defense cooperation agreement that was signed between the U.S. and Hungary. And this defense cooperation agreement brings us closer together as allies. It provides greater integration of our military operations, and it creates greater interoperability. In other words, making it easier for us to work together in military situations, which in the end means greater security for both of our countries and greater security for the peoples of our countries.